Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Yes, likewise. And thank you so much to all of our delegates for joining us today, too. It's my pleasure now this afternoon to be in conversation with Rupal, Akira, and Meenakshi. Both Christina and Christopher send their apologies. Neither of them are feeling very well today, so their voices will be missed, but there will be recordings made available. So hopefully they can add some footnotes as we go along. Today, we'll be discussing how technology is crafting new workspaces and how data is informing our people decisions. So, topics covered will be digital disruption, the role of technology and data, and the rise of social media and corporate accountability. Before we get started, though, I did want to say that I think it's really important for us all to share with everybody who we are, how we self identify, so that they are aware of our positionality and how our identities inform our conversation. So I will kickstart today's session and introduce myself. My name is Dylan. My pronouns are he, him, she, her. I self identify as a white, gender fluid gay man who is an immigrant and privileged to have been university educated and have English as my native language. Meenakshi, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Dylan. I'm Meenakshi, the founder and CEO of Equality Leaders. My pronouns are she and her. I am very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is the oxygen that I breathe.
Perfect, thank you. Akira, how about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm joining from Tokyo, Japan. Yes, I identify myself as he, him, his. I work for an airline with Japan Airlines, and we have been supporting Minakshi's work. My role in my company is with essentially marketing and customer experience, but I have been a very strong advocate for both D&I and also for the wider corporate purpose, because I firmly believe that firms exist to solve problems and not to create problems. And I look forward to having a great conversation with all of you here.
Thank you so much, Akira. And lastly, but not least, Rupal.
Hi there, Rupal Karia. I've been really privileged to work in some awesome companies actually in the tech industry, and all of which have got a big value base around D&I, but actually more important, it's very much around the social responsibility that comes with being a large corporate. So I've worked for a Japanese large organization for 18 years, so I've got lots in common with Akira. And the last 2 or 3 years, I was with a American software company, and now with a company headquartered out of America but founded in Romania. So real difference in cultures, but one thing all three of those companies have, and probably why I chose to go work for them, is they all have a real base all around what they're doing for society.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I definitely want to spend some time this afternoon diving deeper into that. You know, as you say, organizations, companies really do have a responsibility, right, to the communities they serve, as well as, you know, the people within their organization. So, not to waste any more time, but diving straight into, you know, how our way of work really has changed. We have collaborative cloud technologies, you know, access to internet. And so most of us, you know, have been able to adapt relatively easy. But the question is, you know, with this whole digital revolution that we're experiencing now, that has been accelerated by the pandemic, how do we ensure equitable access for everybody? Because research has actually shown that a digital divide exists and is growing, right? Digital exclusion, it's not just a generational issue, but it's also one of lost education and opportunity for those who are most vulnerable. So, how can we ensure this equitable access for everybody? Akira, if you could start us off by sharing your thoughts and perspectives.
Yes, coming from Japan, I think many people would imagine that digital divide is not too much a problem in a country like Japan, where many companies are renowned for having been very successful in technology. But you might be surprised to hear that when we entered into COVID-19, despite the government asking everyone to try to work from home, of the small, medium-sized companies, only around 74%, well, I should put it the other way around, 74% replied that they're not ready to do working from home because more than a third of them are just not prepared to do so. And there is not, well, I think this is just something that scratches the surface when we look deeper into the situation in many companies, in many employees. It's not as straightforward as it appears. There is also a huge issue around skills. People really upskilling to what they need in order to be comfortable with working a fully digital online environment. And the sad answer is that it's not so much the case here, even in Japan. And this produces a chain of problems from an individual level, where you might, because of the digital divide, be in a more vulnerable situation. You might not be able to catch up with work. You might get discrimination. You might get lower pay as a result. It also expands to a larger problem to the organization as a whole for the company, because if you don't have the competencies you need in order to compete effectively in a fully online environment, then that's trouble for you. And that expands also to a country level, whereby productivity could decrease, and as a result, the whole nation will fall behind in terms of competitiveness in the digital space. And it's quite surprising to many Japanese here that actually Japan ranks, I think it's currently around 27th in the IMD World Competitiveness, Digital Competitiveness ranking. So what can we do? I think it's really about first understanding where we are and finding ways in order to be honest, I think, really with ourselves, and to understand where the gaps lie and find ways to have opportunities for a lot of individuals and a lot of companies to catch up in the digital space, so that we get, as a result, more equal opportunities for everyone.
Thank you, Akira. And just a question, a follow-up question on that. The research shows that you said in excess of 70% of Japanese companies who were surveyed said they are not ready for a hybrid working model. Why do you think that number is so high? Do you think it is a cultural thing or some other factor at play?
Yeah, it's good that you brought up the idea of culture, because there is still this pressure that if you are not present in your workspace, then you miss out in building up social capital. It might be good for some short term, like a month or two, but it goes beyond that. It causes problems, because if you're absent, then yes, you would lose out in terms of your ability to build up social capital, and that's how people perceive things, and hence there is this pressure to be physically present even when there's not necessarily the need to do so. Part of it is this pressure, but also a huge part also comes with the ideas or the reality around people not having all the techniques they need to work from home. The IT systems aren't ready, or I should say it's not necessarily the IT system, but it's more so the security systems. Because if you work in companies that deal with, such as our company in an airline space, where we work with a lot of customer information, we have to make absolutely sure that the security systems are in place. But many companies are caught unawares and are just not ready to have that level of security provided to all the employees. So there's this issue around the IT side, around security, around the idea of IT competency and literacy. But also at the same time, it also has a bit to do with housing situation here in Japan, whereby we don't normally live in very large houses. So if you have a family of 4 and everyone is working from home, then it's very hard to find space for us to hold Zoom meetings. Someone will have to make some adjustments and go to the office and work instead, for example.
Thank you so much, Akira. And Rupal, what are your thoughts on this this question, right, of making sure that there is equitable access for everybody?
Yeah, a couple of points on that. I'll pick up some things that Akira said as well, because it's really just to follow on. But it's a real challenge because there's a couple of scenarios here, right? The first scenario is the level of change. So part of the equality element, the level of change means even people that are getting skilled up at certain points in certain technology, change is happening so rapidly that you're not current. So therefore, I think I'm pretty tech savvy, but I compare myself to people that either joined my organisation or even my kids now, and I'm sitting there going, I'm not at all, right? And I would have been when I was their age. So there's this whole principle of how do you stay current as well as how do you get skilled first. So, and that's a real challenge, and you see that. And one thing I'd say is that one of the few positives of having this period of COVID, actually, I think we have slightly leveled the playing field. Everyone thought they couldn't work from home. Everyone thought it wasn't able to work in the way. My parents they're pretty comfortable now socializing on webcams and using iPads and laptops. I wouldn't say they're happy with it, but they know how to, which they couldn't have done 2 years ago. And they've kept in contact with lots of their friends and family doing that. And a number of things which they couldn't do before, they can now do. So I think there's a part there which is about the pace of it and how do we keep everyone current. There is a massive role in education. I mean, the education sector plays a big role in this. And I think it is, again, being positive, it is getting better. Kids are now getting laptops at school, etc., and that makes a difference. Some kids are fortunate that it's their second or third device, and some kids aren't. But you're seeing that in many schools now. And I think there's also a role for tech companies to play. And what I mean by that, not just in the doing good for companies, for countries and companies, but also making things easy to adapt to. The famous one's always the iPhone, how much easier has it made applications? Back in the day, I remember you'd pay hundreds and thousands of pounds to develop things to look at airlines and what time a flight's coming, and now you can do it within seconds on your phone, right? So I think there's a job there for the tech industry when they release things to make it really easy and accessible to all. But I want to pick up on the hybrid point for a second, if I may, as well. I think this is a huge issue which we're about to embark on in the next 12 to 24 months. We've got some of the best offices in London, where I'm based, and really tech-savvy offices. We've really struggled to work in hybrid world, not because people don't want to or any of those issues. The technology, rarely do you go to an office where it works well and you can be at home and hear everything happening in a room and the video moves around the room where you are. There are some people that are really privileged to have that in their offices, but not many. How do you decide what days you go in? So, I go in on a Monday and the rest of my team may go in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you may miss them. So actually you're also going to the office 1 or 2 days a week, but you're not seeing the people you want to engage with. And how does that work? How does that bit of, depending on who you are, and that's definitely one about the equality part. I'm really fortunate. I've got a lovely office in my house and I'm quite happy being at home. For a lot of people in my team, that's not the same case. I've had positions where I've seen people having to halfway through a call move to a different part of the building because their partners or something's happened. But that all said, I think the ability to do it is really exciting for our lives, but the practicalities are going to be really challenging. And I don't think that's just about the technology. I think that's the whole cultural way of doing it. So how do you plan for you and your team all to be in on the same day so you can see them? When you're in the office, how do you make that productive and not just sit on video calls like you're doing at home, because otherwise it's not giving value. So I think there's a change we're about to go through over the next 12 months, probably maybe 24 months, which is going to be really, really different to what we've seen.
Thank you so much, Rupal. And I guess, that ultimately comes down to what many of our other panelists have said throughout the summit today is in terms of practicality, it really demands us having those conversations with our teams, right? Not just making assumptions, oh, well, this works for us, this works for the organization, top down, roll it out, this is what we expect of you, right? This looks different for everybody, right? And it's about taking that into consideration, having those conversations and saying, look, we need to make this work. So what works best for you, and come to a decision, right, on the best way forward that really does allow everybody to thrive in their own way. So thank you for that. Meenakshi, did you have any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Dylan, for bringing me in here. One of the things that I just want to pick up on the point Rupal made about the hybrid working, and one of the things that I've really kind of struggled with over the last, 12 to 18 months is, well, actually not so much the last 20 to 18 months, but just recently, is when you've got a group of people in the office in a meeting and then some actually from home, trying to have these hybrid meetings don't actually work because it's very clunky, it's very disruptive, and it just doesn't work. So we've got to find a way where teams can go into the offices together, to be together, to spend the time together, to create that bond, but also be able to have productive meetings when they are on site together, as opposed to half the team being at home and the other half being at home. It's just a really messy way of conducting, constructive meetings.
Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, it's clunky, but it's also sometimes you end up having very different conversations. For example, people in offices would have their formal meetings, and afterwards they might have some casual chat. But people who are joining on Zoom, it's 100% all business, all about work, and there's very little opportunity for us to really engage with them in some casual conversation. How was the week? What have you been doing? Crack a joke and do things like that. We miss all that unless we consciously build in some time to allow for some of that kind of socializing. Otherwise, again, that kind of creates situations whereby you have a group of people who are able to develop these bonding relationships, but many people missing out in those activities.
And I think we've got to relearn. We've got to relearn this whole way of being in an office. Even the body languages and such, like when you're on a video, is very different. But little things like, I have been to an office a bit, and you forget the fact you can't just press delete meeting, start next meeting, and you've got to actually go between a room that's on the other side of the building, and that takes time, right? And all those things which are sort of second nature to us. And in some ways, we're more productive when we're in this environment because you dial straight from one thing to another and you carry on, but you do lose for sure, as Kira said, some of that social, personal engagement, interaction.
So on that note then, do you think then that our organizational cultures there is a danger that we'll lose that because, of course, we don't have those water cooler moments, the coffee moments, the cracking the jokes, everything that happens outside of the meeting? Do you think our organizational cultures will survive the absence of that?
I think if we don't consciously build in some time to allow for a bit of casual conversation, and it's not just about having a casual conversation, it's a lot about indirect signals that we communicate in our speech. It could indicate that, well, yes, in the meeting I said I agree, but actually I feel quite differently. It's also things about us communicating not through words but through a lot of body language, and a lot of these things, the question is how can we complement what's missing? How can we find or develop new habits that would allow us to fill in some of these gaps that somehow we feel is missing when everything goes online? Is something I guess we have yet to work out.
I think we're social animals, aren't we? And we all need that space to build relationships, partnerships, relationships. If I think about some of my closest friends, I have formed some really great friendship through work. And had I not have had that interaction, I would not have had those relationships. So I think it's really important that as humans, we do come face to face in person with our colleagues. I think it's just so important. Otherwise, how are we going to build cultures of inclusion and belonging if we are constantly just on camera?
Rupal, you
There's
had
also
a
something
comment
rather
you wanted to
interesting
share.
I've noticed that's happening is that when we are physically in offices, when we have meetings, very often the conference room becomes a physical limit of how many people can join a meeting. So typically we would have not more than 20, but when it's online, we can invite over 100, and suddenly everyone is in meetings, in more and more meetings. We just end up joining more and more meetings all day. That's unhealthy to begin with, but it also changed the kind of conversation you have in meetings, where when it's a smaller room, smaller group of people, you can be more candid and frank. But when you look at your screen, it's like, gosh, I have 120, I better not say something foolish. So it kind of also refrains people and change the kind of conversation that we have. So that again is what Meenakshi always said. We are social animals, and sometimes depending on the audience and who is speaking to, it changes somehow our comfort zone and what we feel would be the right thing to say or not say changes quite a bit as well.
I think if I go back to the question, what is a culture? I suppose it's really hard to define, right? Because if you're not in an environment together, what defines your culture? And I've had in my previous company a very significant number of people in the team were new, and most of which had never been in office. In fact, most of which I'd never met before I left in person. And it's really hard what that looks like. And actually, I joined my new organisation just as we had softened, the position and people started going to the offices. And I was quite fortunate because I have met a number of people in person, and that gave me a sense for the culture. But the reality really is, you can't really define a culture when you're not living and breathing it, right? And how do you really look at that? So therefore, the role of leaders and the role of team managers all the way through the organisation is really becoming more important, because if you're no longer in a building and you can feel it and sense it and everyone's walking around and you get the same way of working, then it comes down to those people you're interacting with most days. Or if you're having an all hands for your CEO or whoever else may be doing those all hands. So those roles become really important to instill what the values of a company are, because otherwise you can't really do that. And I think the other thing for companies that are recruiting heavily, for me, I'm spending a lot of time now on, do they fit what we're trying to build? Because the reality, the only way I can define a culture, because I can't really get my hand around and see the way everyone behaves, is to hire people which I think fit the way we want the company to be. So it's really interesting. The hiring has moved away from can you do the job to do you fit the organisation, because that's going to be more important in this world now than perhaps it was before.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Rupal, and it's very hard to really see if someone really fits into the corporate culture unless you really have more face-to-face conversation with that person. Because if you're online, you're just dealing with work and work alone, and it's very hard to first of all for the company to express that this is our culture, this is our way of doing things, these are our beliefs and values, because a lot of these comes from a more casual conversation that we have. So yeah, that I think is a very good point.
Thank you, everybody. So we've touched a lot on, reskilling and upskilling and the need for organizations to really invest in their people, right, to stay abreast with a very fast changing online world of work. So my question to the panel is, how then can we deliver inclusive learning environments using tech? What role does technology have in reskilling and upskilling our people?
I actually think it's easier. Sorry. I was just saying, I think in some ways, a lot of things have become easier. All right. So as much as we absolutely miss the environment of being in an office, but I do think we've now created another world, right? And that world is not going to go back. And if I go back to, how do you therefore serve more people and upskill, etc., a number of things never needed to be in person. I think we touched on it once before when we caught up before the session, was why were we flying around the country or the world and getting whatever, for 2 or 3 hours? Really common, right? It really was. And you sort of think, why were we doing that? And I used the example actually when a few of us called up previously was I was supposed to be in Bradford. I live in London, and it's a 9-hour commute. Monday just gone for a 1-hour meeting, and it made no sense. I didn't actually do it. I did it on video, right? But that was all a way of working. It was the way we sort of were conditioned to be. But I think that therefore opens up so many more avenues, right? So if you had asked me to be physically in a panel today, I probably couldn't have done it, depending where we were. Actually, you've asked me to do it virtual. I can definitely do it because I can make an hour work in my diary. And therefore, the same goes for skinning. And I'm seeing a lot of the young, I've got a 17-year-old kid. One of the kids does a lot of stuff where he learns from companies doing things online. He dials in and college set things up for him. That would have never been possible before because you would have had to go to an office and had work experience. And actually been limited, as Akira said, it would be limited how many people you could fit, so maybe 15 or 20 people. Now they have it unlimited. You can have as many people as you want turn up, and you just listen and you can ask questions. So I think it's opened up a whole new avenue to, subject to having a base level of competency with technology and having the kit and all those sorts of things. But once you've got that, all of a sudden you can reach so many more people worldwide. The skill level doesn't all sit in central London, right, or in central Silicon Valley or Tokyo, right? The skill level around everywhere in the world. So therefore now you can reach this conversation. I use the example right now. Akira's sitting in Tokyo. I'm sitting in Surrey. I'm actually sitting in London. I think you're sitting somewhere in between all of us, Dylan, right?
Yeah.
It's number one better for society. It's probably better for our personal lives, but actually we've got a better quality panel because we're not restricted by the constraints of being physically in one location.
Mm.
Yeah, and in terms of learning, we have also after we've entered COVID-19, we are encouraging our employees to spend 4 days a month doing online learning, and our HR department have created a very rich repertoire of all different kinds of courses for people to learn. So there's actually a huge advantage because if, for example, I am in marketing, but I have always wanted to learn to do finance, I could actually pick up and do finance courses in my spare time. Previously, if I'm at my office doing my regular work, it would first be very difficult to find time to do so, and secondly, these courses will not be available, and even if they're available, it would seem not right to use my working hours to go online and learning something. But now it's official corporate policy that we can spend 4 days a month going online, using all the online resources that we have. And I think many employees are benefiting extremely from from having access to these resources and also having the time to spend in doing all these kind of e-learning.
And I think that's a crucial point, Akira. So thank you for bringing that up, right? It's one thing to say we encourage all of our people and teams to, develop themselves professionally and continue learning. And quite another when you say, okay, yes, we want you to develop professionally. We want you to learn. And so we're giving you the time, we're giving you the resources to be able to do that, right? Because I think, at least in my own experience, pre-COVID, there was very much this expectation that, we expect this of you, but you need to do it in your own time and at your own cost. And no, we're not going to give you time away from your desk to do it. And I think that's really, really important conversation to have.
Dylan, but I also think that people learn in different ways. We all consume our education in different ways, whether it's, through listening, whether it's through watching, whether it's through reading something. I have 2 boys, and they both learn very differently. One is very much a hands-on learner. He's not about the books and he's not about the e-learning side. He wants to physically get involved with things and do things. So I think to humanize what we are talking about here, I think we should, whilst digital is so important so that we all remain connected and we all continue to learn, we cannot, we've got to keep the human side of how we learn in kind of practical ways as well, because we all learn so differently. And this is not just going back to our old ways of doing it, it's about innovating. How do we innovate to ensure that every single individual has the different methods available for learning that suits them.
So I agree, and you can tell that I work for a tech company because I'm thinking it as a positive, right? So that part, the physical part for a second, I agree with that. But let's think about schooling, right? I mean, at the moment, a lot of the training is pretty standard the same, right? There are enhancements. It's definitely getting better. You get a lot more things where you can either YouTube a lesson you missed or whatever else, right? But the world where you had to only be in a classroom and watch and learn in one way, and when if you don't understand it, you go home and you struggle yourself, those days are already started to go. I know watching my kids, if they don't understand it, they don't have private tutors or any of those sorts of things. They go and find a channel online and they'll have a load of videos they can watch that class back on, or they'll have a different medium. As you were saying, everyone's different. But I still think that piece of technology now, because traditionally, and I don't know what they're doing in Japanese airlines, but different people have different consumption models now. So your training could be, you read it, the same training course could be delivered by someone talking to you. Same training course could be a practical face-to-face conversation, but you're doing it from somewhere else in the world, so you're not having to be going out to a classroom. So I think it opens up all those opportunities, right? And that's where we've got to take our mind much wider than what we have available today. Because now the ability using AI could be, I've put in this thing, I actually didn't understand that part. I've already triggered, I haven't understood that part. It then repeats that part for me because it understands I haven't followed it, and it's going at the pace I want it to. And I'm a fast learner on certain things, so it goes quicker. So therefore, it's taken me 20 minutes. Someone else might have taken an hour. So you're actually customizing the learning by the person as the recipient. Now, we're nowhere near there yet. I'm not saying we're there yet, right? But I'm sort of saying this is where we're heading towards. And if you think of the ability for technology to play its role to allow us to upskill our levels to a much better position, I think that's there. I think it really gives you up so many more options, or the ability to be able to see, I always chuckle when we were at some of the universities, people travel across the world to go listen to somebody at Harvard. Actually, I can probably watch a Harvard lecturer right now and have the same experience. Why am I traveling across the world? So those sorts of things I think are going to kind of different. And I think for universities in particular, this is going to be a real defining time, because people are going to start to question, why are we paying so much to be away at university when you can do a lot of this stuff remotely?
In fact, here in Japan, we already have schools with AI teachers, and I think it's especially important for younger education. I mean, once we reach university, I think we are more or less capable of everyone more or less being able to pursue their studies in whatever way that's most comfortable. But if we are talking about really early childhood, when people develop learning skills, some, as Rupal says, some people will learn a lot faster, but very often the teacher is not aware. And if you are managing a class of 30 students, you expect them to follow your speed. So there will be people who are capable of catching up, and there will be laggards. But in the schools that uses AI, for example, in doing math, they would give you exercise questions. If you make a mistake, it will repeat those questions until you get to learn how to solve those problems and then move on forward. So it really personalizes and customizes learning to individual level. So I think that's extremely helpful in terms of education.
Thank you so much, everybody. In fact, we have a question that's come in. And this question comes off the back of our conversation we were having a few moments ago about organizational culture and whether people need to be present in the office or not. And so the question is from Tracy Young, and she says, "Thank you all for a really interesting discussion, especially about face-to-face meetings. I mentioned earlier in the summit a negative experience that I had of feeling pressured to return to the office. So I actually felt quite a lot of anxiety listening to the panel now talk about meetings needing to be face to face. How would the panel, support colleagues with anxiety who find face to face interactions daunting?"
I'm happy to go. I think, Tracy, I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of anxiety. next week, and I'm questioning, what's the setup? Do I tell the team they should start returning? Do I not? So I'm fortunate we work for a company that leave it completely down to the people and how they feel, and there's no forcing anybody to be in the office. But that said, there is an underlying challenge, right? So we had probably my most important meeting of the year, which was planning our whole future for the strategy. It was my choice, and people really struggled. We couldn't hear certain things.
Rupal seems
I think
to
I
be
lost Rupal.
Yeah, Rupal seems to be having a few tech issues. That's okay. Hopefully he'll be back with us. Akira, did you have any thoughts in response to Tracy's concerns?
Yes, I think that's a very real concern that many people faces or are experiencing for the first time, because in past people might not even dare question that, but now I think it's a very honest question to ask. And I think it's very important for companies to understand that there is this anxiety, there is this fear, and to be able to deal with them not as a rule of thumb, but to really look at the individual. I would, or at least in my team, allow flexibility for people to decide whether to come to work or not. But I would encourage, not for the sake of you have to come, that it's compulsory, but more in the sense that it would be beneficial for you to show up every now and then and build social capital, because we are social animals, and having the ability to meet up with someone and to express your views and ideas in front of an audience is helpful for a person in developing his or her career.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rupal, I believe you're
Apologies,
back.
I'm not sure what happened. Is it one of the benefits of working at home?
We hear you now.
I just want to bring you back into the conversation.
That scenario of working in that hybrid, it was really clunky, and it was really hard for people in the room because you couldn't hear what was being said properly from people on the phone. You had to keep standing up, going towards a microphone, etc., and vice versa. And I think the challenge there is, therefore, there was a pressure for people next time to either do it all remotely or all in person, and that was never the intent. How do we resolve that? It's a matter of time. I think part of it is rooms having a proper setup, being able to do this in a hybrid world, because we've been there for years where we've not really had to worry about the room not being perfect for people that aren't in the room, whereas now that's going to be commonplace in the workplace. So I think how do we address it? I think the big part is starting to work out how we work when we're physically in a building, and how do I work when I'm in a call when people are in a building. So that's a cultural thing for us to learn. How do you make sure you bring people in there on the phone? How do you make sure you give people the same time? But also, I think there is a job for the technology to catch up a little bit, and it does exist. It's just very expensive at the moment. Like, we need every room set up to be able to work in that way. And I had a great experience this week with a particular client where they had, I don't know what setup it was, but they were zooming on whoever was speaking in the room, another video that showed the full room available. So it is possible, but it's expensive, and not everyone's got that capability yet.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'd like to kind of switch gears now and move to a little bit of a discussion around data. So as we all know, data is critical to making the right people decisions. But collecting data is a big question, right? Because it depends entirely on trust, right? So building trust means cultivating that psychological safety, in everyday moments. People aren't necessarily going to be willing to share themselves, right? So how do organizations make this happen, right? So organizations want that data. We want to advance the DE&I space using data, but without the trust, we don't have access to the data necessarily. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I take a sort of hybrid approach whereby I think companies will continue to collect data, because it's very important for us to improve efficiency, have automation. More and more people are using RPA now to reduce costs and improve efficiency, but also to generate profit, because you get to understand how consumers behave. You know how to make the best recommendations using a lot of data science algorithms. But it's very much about aggregating, using all these data, but it's still at best second guessing what your customer wants. So I see it as hybrid in the sense that it's time that we can kind of flip this around and have end users, consumers themselves have full control over the data that they own and to decide whom to share this with. And instead of having companies second guess what consumers need, have the end users, customers themselves reveal their preferences to in a privacy preserving manner, and to be able to disclose selectively to entities they wish to. So I think it will be a mixture of both.
A bit more controversial, I guess. I think this is we're already done on this. Right? I mean, we used to talk about cool versus creepy, I think 5 or 7 years ago, right? And in reality, is right now, most people probably don't realise, and many do. Your TV adverts are pretty much customized to what you do, because it's worked out what you've been using via your broadband or your watching habits. Your radio adverts will normally be customized. You probably don't realise, but it's been happening for some time. Some people accept it, some people get nervous by it, but it's people are getting more and more comfortable with this. I think as long as you're getting value as a person or a consumer, you don't mind your data being used. So it's this principle of as long as I'm getting a good service or value back from whatever that data's been used for, I'm okay. There's obviously an inherent risk, but there is the days of everyone being nervous about their posts coming through the letterbox and people having your name and your address. Used to be like everyone had a shredder. Most people don't even think about that anymore, right? So the data that's now valuable is becoming different to what it used to be. There will always be a risk, and there's always a security risk around it, and that's why companies are spending millions on being more secure. But I think we're past the point of no return on this. I think everyone's already gone so far. Even people that don't like to share the data are having to share it for whatever reasons, or doing it consciously or unconsciously. But it's right now, I think we're so far down this line. There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. I think when we talk about trust, there's two broad areas. One is the data security side. Do we trust these entities who store all our data? What happens if it gets hacked? What happens if and also the longevity of these data. So there is concern. And in Japan, I was just looking at some of the stats. 72% of internet users, or actually 74% of internet users, have concerns over their data security because of virus, data security, especially when it comes to payment. That's one level of the trust framework that we need to work out. But another level of trust is the idea around who's getting all the benefit, who's monetizing these data assets, and why should I trust people to use my data when I could actually monetize this myself to my benefit? So it's at least two broad areas that we need some form of governance and trust framework to allow people to transact and use data more freely, especially when you come today to the age of where we have more peer-to-peer transaction going on.
The point that you made there is really valid about trust as well, about the brand. So if you think about the damage that can be done to a brand in the flick of a switch of someone getting a major security breach, there's loads of companies worldwide we can talk about, but it's so significant. So the trust in reverse of that, I think people are becoming more trusting, and actually often, depending on the brand, they trust more or less. But that's now therefore incumbent on those organizations. We think about retailers generally, but not just retailers, it's everybody in the world, to really look after that data, because as soon as you don't, that can be so damaging to a brand and to an organization, both from a reputation and financial perspective.
I think, Rupal, to your point on it feeling creepy, I think the bit that feels really creepy for me is that my iPhone perhaps already knows the next thing that I'm going to search because I've just said something. You know, my Alexa in my bedroom already knows the next song I want to listen to. It's the thing about someone somewhere listening in, whether it's a human or a robot, I don't really care. But the fact that somebody somewhere is listening in to your next move is really creepy for me.
So look, I don't disagree, but you can see I've got my little teddy bear bots here because I work for a company that specialises in bots, right? But
Okay.
you're doing it. The fact you've got an Alexa in your room, if you're not muting it every single second of the day, it's listening to everything you're doing. Now, people can argue what that really does, right? There's loads of conspiracy theories which I don't prescribe to, but the reality is, if you've got something listening to you all of the time, all of the day, it can work out when there's somebody in the house. It can work out probably your gender. It can work out the age roughly within certain categories if it really wants to. So the reality is you're doing that, and I guarantee most people on the call have some sort of device in their house like that, and it's not on mute when they're not using it. So you're doing it, right? So you're creeped up. You find it creepy, but you say so much value because you like the fact you can play a song when you want to, or you want to know the weather or the time or your alarm clock. Therefore, you're giving up that level of data because you're liking the value you get from the product. And iPhone's the best example. Every so often it reminds me how long or how far I am from my house. And I'm like, I haven't even told it where my house is, but it's just worked out every day I'm in this address. And therefore, this is how far I am away, right? So you're absolutely right. But we're doing it every day because we like the products that give us that ability. And it is creepy in some regard. In other ways, some things that are really cool. I love the fact that it does certain things that I couldn't do myself.
Well, I wish it would make me my cup of coffee in the morning, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I love breaking habits and beat these algorithms because I know that they are so well trained that they know my next moves. But a lot of that is really based on my past behavior. So it's also sometimes I can see it as a good reminder. Am I just repeating all my purchases? Am I just repeating all my habits? Maybe it's good time for me to actually break away from these habits and adopt try something new. So it could be used that way as well.
So I completely agree, but there have been some great examples of where I've had examples where I've tried to purchase something. I can't even remember who it was, right? But tried to purchase something and it's actually said, oh, you bought this before. Is this intentional, right? Because often you don't want to buy the same, particularly if it's clothing, the same thing again. I thought that's quite clever. It's got more data on what I've actually done or memory than I have, right? So there are certain things which you look at which are really good behavioural traits, and actually, this thing of just go to retail is a good example. The days of you go into a shop and the person knowing who you are and being able to tell you what you bought last time knows it's gone. But actually, the technology can tell you that now, because if you walk into a suit shop, it knows roughly. Actually, I like pink shirts, but okay, you like pink shirts, you hate blue. Don't show the guy a blue shirt. So the customer service you're going to be able to give in the future is not going to be around, actually, can I tell you about a product, or can I tell you about the quality? It's going to be, I've now got something happening real time that knows this person likes this or doesn't like this, and it always buys this one, so I know this one's going to go with that person, or that fit works. And all of a sudden you're going to get this next level of experience as customers, and therefore you won't mind giving up your data, because the experience you'll get when you go in will be so much better. They recommend things which you love rather than wasting 2 days of shopping and not finding anything you bought before. So I think there is this journey we'll go on that will accept it, because we like what we get for it, although we don't like the fact we're giving up our data.
And I think that's a really crucial point that everyone's brought up here, is that people are willing to give up their data based on a value calculation that we make, right? And so to kind of reel the conversation in and bring it a little bit closer to how do we use data to advance our DE&I within our organizations? People need to understand, there needs to be that level of transparency, right? Where people know, if I'm giving up my data, how is this going to help me? How is this going to help my team? How is this going to make our organization more inclusive and deliver equitable outcomes, which is an expectation of mine, right? But speaking from an employee's perspective here, companies have asked for my data time and time again. I've given it, and I've seen no change. There's no meaningful change. So when you come and ask me again and you tell me, oh, we've got great, intentions here. We're going to use your data. I'm not going to be so willing to give up my data. I'm not going to be so willing to share with you that actually I do self-identify as a gender fluid gay man, or whatever, your marginalized identities you have. People are not going to do that because there hasn't been the transparency.
I think, yes, the transparency and then trust is really very, very important. If I may just use the analogy of medicine and DNA data, you can use that to charge high premium for your insurance. But on the other hand, you can also use that information to improve your health through digital. So depending on how you use that piece of information, it really changes dramatically. So likewise for companies using HR data, if we are using this intelligently to help our employees to grow their strengths, that's good use of it. But if you're using it just as a way to screen out people, and that's going to be really very bad practice that we would like to avoid. So again, it really depends on how people decide to use the information that they have aggregated.
Yeah.
Thank you, Akira. Brilliant. So we have just 10 minutes left. So I want to touch on very briefly on this idea of social media, right? And that it gives people power, right? Power to call out leaders and organizations. People now have that avenue for accountability, right? It's no longer controlled by your boss or your company. What are your thoughts on this? This whole dynamic between social media and corporate accountability.
I think it can be extremely helpful, but it could at the same time be very destructive as well, because people like to sort of point out negative things, and it goes viral much quicker than sometimes good news. So it really depends on how the energy is being directed to. Is it really for a good cause? Are we intelligent with our emotions, or are we just unleashing our emotions without thinking about the consequences? So I think in terms of social media, I do hope that everyone would be more responsible in the way they use it. But I guess a lot also has to do with how people like the idea of sort of verifying ideas. Because if it's just my idea, I might have doubts. But if I know that there are a million people agreeing with what I said, that gives me confidence. So it can be very positive. It can be very powerful. It can be very helpful. It could generate a lot of positive social norms that determine or define who we are as a society. But you could at the same time go utterly wrong and ends up just creating a lot of strife and division, which is not what we want. Yeah.
I think social media can make or break a person. Social media allows you to have this platform to hide behind the platform, to say whatever you want to say. The abuse, the racism, there is just so much going on. And but it's also equally a really great opportunity to be able to reach millions of people with some really great positive communications, to be able to make this world a better place. But I think it's a bit of a tale of two halves in my point of view. And I've seen some, really good friends being trolled on social media, and it has absolutely destroyed them. So yeah, I think there is no one single solution or an answer to how we use social media.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on it, social media as a platform's like everything, it's a tool. It's dependent on how people choose to use it, and therefore it's incumbent on people to use it in the right way. For a business society, I mean, people have started using it really cleverly in there's things like Teams and Slack and all those tooling, which makes life, I think, easier for collaboration. It's all come from that social way of working. So you are starting to see it's all edging behaviours into organisations. But it's a dangerous thing because people can put in a quick comment about themselves or their day at work, and it can hit hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, without even a thought. And that's one person's perspective. And we've got to be really careful because it's your account. I'm here today as myself, Rupal Karia. I am a representative of UiPath, but these are my views. And you're therefore going to be really careful when you're representing yourself, whether you're linked to a brand or yourself or how you're attributing that. So I think there's a lot of learning, because again, this is not going anywhere. If anything, it's getting more. But actually, how do we choose to use it? So I know for myself, for example, LinkedIn is my work tool. I use that for things which are work related. Everything else, it's either locked down to a very small number of people, which I class as friends, and I wouldn't put stuff to do with work on that channel. So it's a choice I made. Not everyone does that, but I think it's a really important part because it's a really dangerous thing you can get into if you start to talk about things publicly in an organisation, and actually it's something that can cause a lot of issues. Well, there's a number of case studies where people have either said something very inappropriate and therefore had to leave an organisation or anything of that nature. So I think it's a real positive in lots of senses. Again, the reach, the access you get to people, like we talked about earlier, is much better because you can actually get access to people which are really relevant to you in your day job quite easily. But there is a downside of that with everything, which is it's incumbent on people, and not everyone uses things in the right way.
Yeah, and you can't control it as well. And I think you can easily make a comment and it goes viral in a bad way. But it also could be the case whereby you are silent, you don't take a stance, and you get criticized for not taking sides. So there are many ways in which things can go wrong. But I think it all boils down to us as a society as to how we want to use this platform. It's a bit like social manners when we are in face-to-face in the meeting room or in the dining hall. We try to be civil, but and I think that's kind of the attitude we need when we get on a social media platform is try to be civil to each other.
It reminds me a bit of the analogy of school, right? We talk about the social media companies have a job to stop things being put on it. Absolutely right, they do. But actually, how many things get posted every day, and how could you, regardless what technology you use, how can you tell? And this is a bit like when you're at school, right? The teachers in the school have a responsibility to make sure kids behave in the right way, but they can't always manage everything that happens in and around. So unfortunately, there is always going to be things that don't get picked up, even if the best technology and the best screening and the best AI and the best algorithms. But therefore, there is this policing around it. But I think it's a real tough job they've got on their hands because it's grown so quickly. It's impossible to check every post that goes out and make sure there's nothing inappropriate on there. So it is back to, unfortunately, us having to get people to learn that there's a way of behaving and a way of not behaving.
Yeah, it also has to do with the idea of rights. I have the right to voice my opinions. I have the right to do this and that. But I think the right comes in terms of mutual reciprocity. We have to think of what that means to the other person and not just to myself. So I think this, again, back to my idea of being civil and thinking of us as in society as having mutual responsibilities to each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So with just 2 minutes left, what idea, reflection, or question would you like to leave our delegates with? You have 30 seconds each.
I'll quickly try, guys. Scribbled out a few things as we're talking, actually. So, firstly, this hybrid world is going to be really challenging. I've talked about that in the last few moments. We need to be really conscious of it. Work-life balance should be better. It should be, but there's a real risk it goes the opposite way. Because as you start to work more and more from home, things start to intrude and you start to do things out of hours. So I think there's a skill here of how do you make sure you get the balance right and don't let it go one way or the other. Diversity, which is a word we talk about a lot. My best example of diversity is being able to let people. Some people don't want to work at home. Some people want a hybrid. We need to work out how we're going to allow people in their working world to do things the way they want to. So my final thing, 2 tips, just personal work for me. Do your calls if you fancy doing a call while you're walking. I do it quite regularly and it's so much more refreshing than sitting at your desk, and it gives you some air. One which is a personal one for me. I got so fed up of eating the same food every single day at home that I made lunch. I do delivery once a week now if I'm not in London, just to get something a bit different to make it a treat for me. And I think when you're in the office, really make use of it. Don't just turn up there to be in an office and sit there because you feel you need to be. Be there because you think it's a valuable experience and get that face time with the people you need to.
Thank you, Rupal. How about yourself, Akira?
Yeah, conscious of time, I'll just have a very short quote from T.S. Eliot, and I think it resonates very well with our topic today. It goes as follows. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? So this was T.S. Eliot choruses from The Rock, written 3-4 years ago, but it still resonates a lot to us today.
Thank you. And finally, Meenakshi.
I think it's a thought that I would like to actually bring together from the whole team of equality leaders, what we actually exist for. Because what we are trying to do is we're not trying to impress anyone. What we're trying to do is progress the conversation. So with that in mind, stick with us. We are here to progress the conversation on the future of work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making this world a better place.
Perfect note to end our panel on. Thank you so much, Akira, Rupal, and Meenakshi, for your time. We really, really appreciate it. And as I mentioned earlier on in the day, all of our panel discussions will be available on our YouTube channel. So for those of you who have missed it, please pop on over to Equality Leaders YouTube channels and you can take some notes. I know I need to take plenty. I've got lots to reflect on. So thank you once again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Akira. Thanks, Rupal. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.